Hey y'all, welcome
Powered
to
by
Black
Riverside
True
FM.
Crime. My name is Lauren, I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about a high-profile case. I have been following this case for almost 2 years now, even before they arrested now convicted killer Bryan Kohberger. This case is known as the Idaho murders, also known as the Idaho 4 and the Moscow murders. This happened back in November of 2022. 4 students were stabbed and killed in an off-campus housing in Moscow, Idaho, between the hours of 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. A total of 6 people were in the house at the time. 6 weeks later, Bryan Kohberger was arrested in Pennsylvania. Now, how is a man in Pennsylvania connected to crimes in Idaho? Let's rewind, because there's a couple reasons how. Number 1, he was in the area at the time the crime was committed. He actually lived about 15 minutes away in Pullman, Washington, where he was studying criminology at a nearby Washington State University. So he was only in Pennsylvania for the holiday with his family, where he's from. The cell phone data also connected him to this crime. The cell phone tower that serviced the house had pinged his phone about 23 times between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. about 6 months before this crime happened. So this canvassing suggested that these crimes could have been premeditated. It also pinged at 9 a.m. after the morning of the murders. So remember, the crime occurred at 4 a.m. So this suggests that he was going back to the crime scene, although in the affidavit it mentioned that it maybe wasn't definitive proof. They weren't sure. It could have been a ping from his phone, but I guess that technology isn't 100% sound. Also, the morning of the murders, his phone had been turned off at 3 a.m. and was turned back on after 4:30 a.m. after the murders had taken place. Also, the phone was moving in a direction from the scene of the crime back to his home. This is significant because when asked for an alibi, during the time that his phone was off, he allegedly reported that he was driving around watching the moon and stars. And this was something that he did frequently. So perhaps his canvassing was also him soft launching his alibi to commit this crime. There was also DNA found at the scene. So there was touch DNA that was on a sheath from a knife under one of the victims. And it was matched to his father through genetic genealogy and later to Bryan Kohberger. He was also caught on surveillance from a neighbor's doorbell camera. It captured a white car later to be determined as a Hyundai Elantra by experts circling the block in the moments preceding the crime and leaving at a high rate of speed after the crime. And this is probably what got the ball rolling in this case. This was actually a multiple agency operation, and a BOLO was sent out on this car. So this car was brought to the attention of the authorities, and a security guard, or maybe like a campus police type figure of the complex that Bryan stayed in, remembered and pulled up his information. And so this really initiated their investigation of him because all the other evidence I mentioned started to align with his movements, and they began to like him more and more for this crime, according to the affidavit. There were also eyewitnesses at the scene. So the police essentially have every element of evidence they need to build an unyielding case. They have the opportunity, they have the cell phone data, they have the DNA, they have him on video, and now we have eyewitness. So like I said in the beginning, there was a total of 6 people in the house that night. So there were actually 2 surviving roommates to this crime. And I'm using the term roommate, but of the 6 people in the home that night, only 4 of the students actually lived there. So 2 of the students that were killed were actually just visiting. And that's just another fact that makes this case particularly sad. But one of the surviving roommates noted to police on multiple occasions in interviews that she encountered an intruder wearing all black with a ski mask and bushy eyebrows. So this is ironic because she remembered arguably the most distinctive feature of this man's face. Through all her fear and trauma, the most pronounced feature of his face she remembered. So I'm going to bring y'all up to speed with where we are with the case today. The trial was supposed to start on August 18th of 2025. So for 2 years, the defense and the prosecution have gone back and forth, filing motions, trying to delay, trying to get evidence thrown out, etc. Kohberger has up until this point pled not guilty. As of July 2nd, the latest hearing, he pled guilty. So we are not getting a trial, which has offered mixed emotions for the victims and their families. I personally think people do confess to crimes they don't commit a lot, but in this case, and from the beginning, I've always felt like Bryan was guilty. This does not feel like a false confession. This feels like genuine guilt of these crimes. And we still have questions with no answers, and at this point, we may never have the answers since he pled guilty. One of the questions is, where is the murder weapon? We still don't have the knife. There were reports during the plea hearing that his cell phone data actually placed him in Lewistown, Idaho over the next couple days after the crime. And they believe that the weapon could have potentially been dumped there because there's a lot of what they said running water and rivers. And they can't prove it, again, because it's never been recovered. But that was just a theory from the state. Also, other questions is why the students waited until 12 p.m., almost 8 hours after the crime, to call police. So let me tell y'all something about trauma, okay? Your body has the ability to go into flight or fight to protect you. These were college students, like in their 20s, but they're still kids. Like, they've been out drinking, they were up late, and no one who has been through what those girls went through is in a position to judge, okay? We should protect and defend these girls at all costs. As a precedent, there was a case in the 90s of a roommate who came home after her roommate was attacked. And upon seeing her roommate, she described what she thought was vomit at the time. Only until the paramedics arrived and said the word blood did she realize the room was red. So we have to understand, these kids didn't do anything wrong. They behaved like college students. They weren't in sketchy neighborhoods that they didn't know. They were literally just hanging out, enjoying each other's company, and went home, which is just another layer to this case that makes it very sad. They didn't do anything risky to put their lives in danger. They were doing what they would normally do on a weekend night. So I think the biggest, most unanswered question in this case is why. We still don't have a definitive answer for why he committed these crimes. There are so many theories. During the plea hearing, it was suggested he may not have intended to commit all the murders. When he entered the home, he immediately went to the third floor, and maybe the others were killed as they encountered him on the way out. Also, this particular bedroom where he went first could be seen from the street where they believe that he could have been watching them. So there were rumors of stalking. At some point, some Instagram messages were mentioned, and there was some conversations around incel culture. But really no one knows because it hasn't been confirmed. There was past drug use, I think specifically heroin. I cannot confirm this information. I haven't interviewed any of the family members or the killer in this case, but there was a book that I read written by Howard Bloom called When Night Comes Falling, and I would imagine because this book is widely distributed that this information was fact-checked. Maybe it's not, but I can't vouch for it because I only read it in the book. All I can say is that if this is true, that answers the type of mindset that someone would have to be in to do something like this. And this isn't an excuse to justify what he did, but I have personal and professional dealings with mental health and addiction, and these people are unwell in their active disease. So just the past history of it, even if he was in recovery, speaks to previous psychology and self-destructive behaviors. But as my friend Mo would say, he was just on demon time, okay? For someone who was so enthusiastic about his program of studying in criminology and seemingly good at it, I think there were professors that described him as really bright student, almost to the point of arrogance. He just left a lot of breadcrumbs, which is kind of ironic. Criminals make mistakes. That's how they get caught. But he made some pretty big blunders, considering his extensive knowledge of crime scenes and crime scene processing. This was something that he wrote about in his studies. And then you turn around and leave the knife sheath and drive your own car. Like, make it make sense. Then has the nerve to try to cover his tracks by attempting to switch the plates. Like, come on. The one thing I've said from the beginning is that this was solid police investigating from start to finish. Even though he was arrested 6 weeks after the murders, they were watching him almost as soon as 7 to 14 days after this crime was committed. So they were watching the moves he was making to cover his crime. More irony in this case is his confession to avoid the death penalty. This is something that I can't understand. Like, you did all of this and terrorized these people, and you yourself are afraid to die. He essentially wasted time and resources for the past 2 years pleading his innocence. Like, okay, eager to exonerate head ass, only to be scared to die. A demise that he led others to. You were supposed to be Mr. Big and Bad. So I definitely understand the feels of some of the family members and him not facing the death penalty, because if you harm my children in that way, there is no negotiating the sentence. Like, you gotta go. But that's just my own personal opinion. And I just don't understand the Mr. Big and Bad who killed 4 people but is afraid to die. But my good friend reminded me last night that that's what cowards do. So there are a lot of things we learned at the plea hearing that we had not heard yet. We learned a more precise timeline of how and why the state thinks it happened and some other theories. We also learned more ways in which he tried to cover his track. And I imagine we'll learn more at the sentencing hearing, more information that we don't know. But this is just karma at its finest. And, people say karma is a bitch, but I read a quote that I think is very interesting, that karma is not a bitch. Karma is reasonable and neutral. So I will report back, because the gag order will be lifted and we are likely to learn even more evidence that we haven't heard during the during the sentencing hearing. The killer will have an opportunity to speak, so we don't know if he will say anything or give closure to the families, but we'll also hear the victims' impact statements. So we'll end this episode on this note. Many times these conversations always highlight the killers, so I'd like to honor the victims because it's important to remember this story is theirs. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Zaina Carnoodle, and Ethan Chapin. Rest in amazing power. May your legacy live on. So that's all we have until the 23rd, folks. We will reconnect. Until next time. I'm Lauren, and I'm signing off.